So we're on the draw here, and I'm going to keep this. So our opponent's sacrificing a Wooded Foothills for a forest. There's a Birds of Paradise. So we have both Bolt and Fatal Push in our deck, and there's a Bolt in hand. So I think we want to just go ahead and get rid of the birds here. I am going to take 2 off the Steam Vents. I think it's a close decision whether to fetch there or not, but we can just play the Scalding Tarn on the next turn, and considering our opponent played a birds, it's not likely we're up against a super aggressive deck, but here's a Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, which is actually really annoying. Looking at our hand, nothing we're going to be able to cast this turn besides potentially just running out a Snapcaster Mage, which isn't that appealing. I'll play a Scalding Tarn just in case we want to play out a Snapcaster Mage and not use the Bolt in our graveyard, but hopefully we don't have to do that. So we're going to take the 2 here from the Thalia and wait to see what the follow-up may be from the opponent. And it looks like there is a follow-up. So it's going to be Knight of the Reliquary. Unfortunately, we can't Mana Leak this. So the Knight is just going to simply resolve. And that's really not good news. I'm going to get a Blood Crypt here. And just untap, hoping to draw a removal spell. Unfortunately, a Swamp does not meet the criteria of being a removal spell. So this is a bit of an awkward spot. We have a Vendilion Click, which we can play. So I'm going to go ahead and wait for the opponent to draw and then run out this Vendilion Click to see what's going on in our opponent's hand. Next turn, we can Snapcaster Mage plus Lightning Bolt to take care of the Thalia, but this Knight of the Reliquary is also a pretty legitimate problem. So I'm going to take Renegade Rallier there. Our opponent has 2 Noble Hierarchs in land, so I think Renegade Rallier is definitely the best card in the hand. So it looks like a pretty straight green-white Hate Bear Knight of the Reliquary deck. And these decks have been becoming more and more popular, so it's not that surprising to see, but it's definitely not going well here in this particular game. So our opponent's coming in with the Thalia, planning on activating the Knight. So we could chump with Vendilion Click and save ourselves 4 damage, but just going to go to 10. Hope to draw something like a Terminate. So there's a Thought Scour, which we can cast. We can also go Snapcaster Mage plus Lightning Bolt. So we can bolt away the Thalia and potentially chump the Knight. So I'm going to go with that line. Planning on playing the Snapcaster Mage this turn. We'll see what our opponent searches up with this Knight of the Reliquary. And I think we have to start trying to clock our opponent a little bit. So went ahead, made the attack with the Vendilion Click. Now our opponent has a Gavany Township, so the plan could all of a sudden be to go wide with these Noble Hierarchs rather than attack with just a single creature like we saw last turn for the Exalted bonus. So we'll see exactly how our opponent wants to attack here, but in order to make use of the Gavany Township, you do need 4 mana, and 2 of the mana sources are Noble Hierarchs. So our opponent's probably thinking about, we're at 10 right now. If there's a way to come across for lethal, hopefully we're not up against something like a Path to Exile. And it looks like our opponent is going to make an aggressive attack here. So I'm going to jump at the chance to play Snapcaster Mage and go ahead and target this Lightning Bolt in the graveyard. I think we want to take out the Thalia still in order to free up some of our other cards. Like, casting Thought Scour for 2 mana is much worse than casting it for only a single blue. So now we're dealing with a Noble Hierarch attacking and a Knight. So we are almost certainly going to block here. We can trade, essentially, for the Noble Hierarch if our opponent activates the Gavany Township. But the Knight would be 8 damage at that point, including the Marsh Flats. So I think we want to just chump the Knight and preserve our life total a little bit. We're going to let our opponent activate this Gavany Township if they elect to do that. So we're taking 1 instead of 8, falling to 9. And there's a Tasker, which we can potentially play this turn if we would like to do so. So first I'm going to Thought Scour, see what we can put into our graveyard. So we found a Colligan's Command and another copy of Thought Scour. We also have another Snapcaster Mage, and we drew a Thought Scour off of the Thought Scour. So lots going on there. I would like to attack with this Vendilion Clique, continue keeping the pressure on, and then run out this Tasker, the Golden Fang. And I'm going to keep 1 Thought Scour in the graveyard, planning on potentially playing Snapcaster Mage this turn and using that Thought Scour that we have in the yard. So I'm going to take 2 off the Watery Grave in order to get it into play untapped. So we're able to mount some pressure here, get a little bit going, but now here's a Path to Exile. That is terrible news. So we can play the Snapcaster on the Thought Scour still for a chump block on the Knight, and then take some more damage from Noble Hierarchs. But it looks like our opponent is attacking with everything. So another Path to Exile would clearly be lethal here if our opponent does have that. Otherwise, our opponent may just be going for a follow-up play using this 4 mana that they have available, because the Gavany Township activation is not available anymore because of the Noble Hierarchs attacking. So there's a Collective Brutality. That could be useful. This Mana Leak hasn't really done anything for us. So we can potentially discard that. And our opponent's actually going to use a Ghost Quarter, which we do have another basic left in our deck. And Renegade Rallier for Thalia. That's pretty good. So our opponent was able to do quite a bit that turn. And we're stuck right now. So I think we are locked into playing this Collective Brutality, trying to gain some life and then draw into a Terminus with the Thought Scour. So I am going to use 2 modes on this Collective Brutality to kill the Thalia and then cause our opponent to lose 2 life, and we're going to gain 2 life here. So let's get rid of the Thalia. Our opponent is actually going down to 7 here. Thought Scour for Serum Visions. Sure, why not? We'll cast the Serum Visions. Double Colligan's Command on top. I think we're just dead on board here, assuming our opponent sees the lethal attack. I'll put a Colligan's Command on top of our library, though. Well, actually, we're not necessarily dead on board, so we have a chump on the knight, and then if we let the Rallier and a Noble Hierarch through, that would be 6 damage. At the same time, we don't necessarily have a line to win the game. We do have a Terminate now, which we picked up. Unfortunately, just 1 mana short from being able to cast it. If we were able to cast this Terminate, it would be a completely different story. So, looks like an all-out attack that's going to be coming in. We're going to drop to 2. So let's see, we can draw Colligan's Command, but still not seeing a way out of this, but see what our opponent does. And there's another Knight of the Reliquary. So unless we're able to kill our opponent this turn, which we're not, so just going to go to game 2. So sideboarding for this matchup, some of the counterspells are not as good, especially if we're on the draw, which we were that game. Now we're going to be on the play. We want removal for sure. So Dreadbore, yes. And I think the Thoughtseizes and the Ancestrals are also considerations. So I'm going to take out a Mana Leak. We drew multiple Mana Leaks that game, and they were essentially useless for us. So I think we want to go towards Ancestral Visions because this is going to be kind of a long. If we're going to win these games, it's going to be long and drawn out, where we're trading 1-for-1 with removal. So the Ancestrals seem pretty good if that's going to be the case. The Thoughtseizes, not so much, just because, yes, they're okay, but sometimes these games will come down to top decking. Think we can afford to take out a Collective Brutality. And then sometimes I will just shave a Thought Scour just kind of generically. It's good. They are good in the deck, but sometimes when you're boarding in the Ancestrals, you have to shave a card draw spell. So we're on the play here. And definitely going to mulligan this hand. And this is fine. So our opponent's also on the mulligan. Alright, so we're even on that front. And here's a Delver, which we just didn't see at all last game. And it's a matter of whether we want to keep this on top. I think we do, but our plan is to play a Tasigur quickly, so the Delver being on top isn't really going to help us. But we can sort of bluff putting it on top like we actually want it on top when it's not. It doesn't really matter that it's going to be on top because we're going to sacrifice this fetch land and go for a Thought Scour. So we're able to put 4 cards in our graveyard and then accelerate out a Tasigur on the following turn, which is pretty good. So our opponent's starting on a Noble Hierarch. And we need to get a black land for the Tasigur. So like last game, an early shock of down to 17. And we can actually go ahead and bolt away the Hierarch, the Noble Hierarch, if we want to, and then play the Tasker, or just play Tasker. But I think we want to go for the Bolt and just really push our advantage. So turn 2, 4-5, it's pretty good. This deck is capable of making these delve creatures come into play very quickly. That's part of the advantage of playing so many cantrips and cards like Thought Scour. Still have some gas left behind, so if our opponent's just passing the turn, that's good. But this other Tasker, not super relevant. So Fatal Push, nice pickup. But Upkeep Pass and now actually let me take that back. We may have to try to set up playing our other Tasker that's in our hand. So I'm going to get a Swamp here off the Path to Exile. And now we can set up a little bit. There's a Scalding Tarn. Spell Snare and Ancestral both aren't super useful right now. Our opponent didn't play a 2-mana creature, so we know about Thalia's, possibly Voice of Resurgences that our opponent may have, but that doesn't mean we want to put the Spell Snare on top of our deck. As far as the Ancestral Vision, we can put it on top and see how this plays out. I'm going to play the Scalding Tarn. If we feel like we want that card, like maybe our opponent doesn't do anything this turn, and we feel like the game's going to get drawn out a little bit more, we can go ahead and draw the Ancestral and suspend it. But if our opponent makes a play of significance, we may just want to Fatal Push this turn and then go for Tasker on the following turn. So looks like a Renegade Rallier for Marsh Flats. So we have the choice of whether or not to push away the Renegade Rallier and then play Tasker. And I think we want to just make that play here. Because we can potentially start activating the Tasker as well and generating advantage that way once we get it into play. So that's kind of an alternative form of card advantage. And if we drew the Ancestral and didn't Fatal Push, we wouldn't be able to play Tasker this turn. So now we can play Tasker if we want to. But now here's a Vendilion Click, which is actually pretty attractive to click our opponent, given our opponent has 3 cards. We could wait on this Tasker. So now that we have this Vendilion Click, I actually like that play because our opponent may not have any gas the following turn. We don't know. We want to see exactly what's going on, operate with perfect information or close to perfect information. And so we see multiple Path to Exiles. So this is actually a very good hand that our opponent has. It's pretty scary. I think the Tireless Tracker is the best card, but the paths are also super annoying considering we were relying on this Tasker to do a lot of work for us. The Renegade Rallier can get back a Noble Hierarch or a fetch land. I'm going to take the Tireless Tracker because our opponent drawing multiple cards off of clues seems like it would be really bad for us at this point. But I'm also not happy about the spot that we're in. That was above average, I would say, that out of the cards our opponent could reveal. But this type of deck can grind with the best of them. So our opponent's just continuing the mana advantage plays with the Renegade Rallier. And now we know that our opponent is back to 1 path in hand. So we would like to optimally have our opponent path away the Snapcaster and make room for this Ancestral Visions. What I'm going to do here is play out the Snapcaster, target the Serum Visions in the graveyard, try to set up our draws a little bit more. And we can also suspend this Ancestral Vision. So this is a pretty good couple of cards that we're seeing in Snapcaster and Lightning Bolt. So I'm going to put the Snapcaster first, followed by the Bolt. Once again, we have a fetch land, so we can potentially, if we don't want to draw those cards, we can always sacrifice the Polluted Delta. And our opponent also has Path to Exile, which is a way that our opponent can try to force us to shuffle our deck as well. So if our opponent attacks with the Renegade Rallier, I'm perfectly fine trading Snapcaster for it. But here's a Batterskull. That's actually pretty insane. Especially considering we don't have a Colligan's Command. So that's going to resolve. And now we would really like Colligan's Command. Not sure why our opponent played the Batterskull pre-combat. So I am going to make the block here. And now the question is whether we want to draw the Snapcaster Mage. So we can draw Snapcaster Mage. We know that the last card in our opponent's hand is a Path to Exile. We could draw Snapcaster Mage, Fatal Push the Germ, which would mean our opponent would have to return the Batterskull, potentially, and then replay it. So I think that's a fine line to take. So I'm just gonna go ahead and do that right now, since we're gonna do it. We're gonna do it either way. And we would love for our opponent to still path away the Snapcaster Mage. So this is just going to buy us some time, hopefully, until this Ancestral resolves in a few turns. But our opponent's living off the top of their deck, so any type of significant creature that impacts the board would be bad. Especially like a Knight of the Reliquary, which, okay, as I'm saying that, there it is, of course. Why did I even mention Knight of the Reliquary? So it's in. We have a Lightning Bolt sitting on top of our deck still, but that's not going to be able to answer the this Knight of the Reliquary. So I'm going to go ahead and crack the fetch land. And our opponent has 3 mana available so that they can return this Batterskull potentially. Spell Snare, not the card we wanted to pick up. We don't even really want to play Tasker this turn because our opponent's just going to use the path to get rid of it. So I'm going to pass. And it may be that our opponent actually goes and equips this Knight of the Reliquary. And then this would just be a huge creature alongside the Batterskull. And it looks like that is going to be the play. So because the Knight has Vigilance, our opponent can also activate the Knight of the Reliquary as well. So I'm going to chump with the Snapcaster Mage. Doesn't feel good by any means. But it does put another card in our graveyard for Tasker for Delve. And there's another Snapcaster. That isn't going to do anything. So at this point, pretty much no other line but to play the Tasker from our hand. So if our opponent goes to path it, at least we'll get one activation. Maybe we find something like a Colligan's Command or a Terminate. But this Knight of the Reliquary is growing so big that one hit from the Knight is almost lethal at this point. So our opponent's cycling through their deck, and we see how good the Horizon Canopies are, so you can cash lands in for a fresh card. So I'm going to activate the Tasker now in response to the Path to Exile. And Thought Scour Lightning Bolt, not the best. Looks like we're going to get a Bolt back, which makes sense. So let's see. Our opponent played a Noble Hierarch. It looks like we can be attacked down to 1, assuming our opponent gets a Fetch Land or a Horizon Canopy. Or I guess down, yeah. I believe we can be attacked down to 1, given this board. But now the Ghost Quarter changes that math. I think our opponent actually has lethal this turn. So there's the Exalted. Our opponent can Ghost Quarter us, then sack a land for either a Fetch Land or a Horizon Canopy. And this is all before the Ancestral could potentially maybe get us back in the game. You know, we never know what we would draw off three more cards here. So this is going to be lethal, assuming our opponent uses the Ghost Quarter, which is happening. And that's going to be the match.